Hey, California, thanks so much for listening again. I'm doing a show today, again with Matt Owen, instead of tomorrow. Forgive me for the change. I know it's last minute notice. I will be changing from Tuesdays to Mondays from now on. So now the show will be on Mondays and Thursdays regularly. And still at 10 o'clock, so please keep listening to Colexit Radio Mach 2.0. Matt, you were just telling me something about Consulta. Can you tell everybody what Consulta is?
Well, a consulta is just a consultation. It's an informal poll in which you're asking questions of people and tabulating the results. Okay, I worked on a couple of those for the Zapatistas, in which they were asking some questions. They were intended specifically for the Mexican people, but they invited international observers to participate too, because they wanted to see how as many people as possible thought about the questions that they asked. So I'm looking at the upcoming California Independence Day of 4th of November, which is when we first declared our independence in 1836. It has nothing to do with being annexed by the U.S. And which also happens to be the day that Refuse Fascism chose to begin their campaign, interestingly enough. And it's the approach of the looming fascism in the U.S. that has ballooned our movement into being a real movement, not just a fringe. Well, I says, well, what else can we do? And I thought back to those consultas, and I says, why don't we have our own consulta? Okay, so the idea is to print out a bunch of paper ballots, bilingual, two-sided, that ask a few simple questions. And each question has a story to tell. The first question I came up with, other than California independence, of course, which is the last question, because in framing what we envision an independent California republic to be like, the first question I came up with is, should the California Republic vouchsafe all human rights, as the U.S. fails to do? At the end of World War II, well, not at the end because he died by then, but President Franklin Delano Roosevelt proposed a second Bill of Rights, enshrining the rights that have been trampled during by the Great Depression. Okay, the right to work, the right to adequate remuneration, to have a livable income, the right to Social Security, to health care, to education, and so on. Now, after he passed, Eleanor Roosevelt did manage to push those through in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And further, there were two international covenants or treaties offered, one on civil and political rights, which are the same ones that are enshrined in the U.S. Bill of Rights. But then there was the second concept of economic, social, and cultural rights, which was the basis of FDR's proposal, and it never was acceded to by the United States, much less find its way into the U.S. Constitution. So we have an opportunity on independence to enshrine those rights in California's Constitution, to bring it into compliance with the Universal Declaration, with the international covenants, with the Pan American covenants, etc. We have that opportunity. So that's the basis of question one. Okay, should we do that? Right? Mm-hmm. And offering that as a vision of our California Republic. The second question has to do with environmental protection. Okay, should the California Republic secure environmental protection? Because without that, we're basically fouling our own nest and everybody else's. Mm-hmm. And we have a history of actually engaging in efforts to do that. Sometimes they're inconsistent. Continuing to allow fracking, as Governor Brown is doing, is inconsistent with some of the other things that he's signing. So we're not consistent, but we do have that as an effort, and it's very definitely a key value of our independence movement. Its prominence in CalConCon. So that's the second question. The third question has to do with California becoming a plurinational republic. That is to say, one in which it recuperates in its sovereignty in tandem with the indigenous nations of California recuperating theirs, resulting in a plurinational republic. And we have a recent experience of that with the plurinational state of Bolivia, in which a movement led by indigenous activists became the government of Bolivia and immediately began to incorporate plurinationality into their constitutional order. They have various indigenous nations which are represented in their legislature. They have various projects which are under the authority of those nations, both singly and jointly. That is how Bolivia went from being a basket case economically, where they're having to chop 3 zeros off their currency with regularity or launch a new one, to one of the fastest growing, most prosperous countries in South America. It was indigenous leadership that did that. And we did the same thing before they did in the twin cities of Palm Springs and Cathedral City, half of which are on the Agua Caliente Reservation. So they are co-governed, these two cities, by their city councils and mayors, and also by the General Council of the Agua Caliente Reservation of the Great Cahuilla Nation. Mm-hmm. So we had the example before Bolivia did, actually. So we know that plurinational governance works. It works well. And so in response to the criticism I got from our local indigenous folks, the Yuvitan, the people of the Pines, that what happens to our treaty rights if California is independent? If we're no longer in the United States, what happens to our treaty rights with the United States? This is our response to that, to incorporate that. And we've been working on convincing other people, letting them know about what we're doing and offering that as an example of, retrocession of public land. If California is independent, there is no difference between state and federal land. It's all under the same government. And so we have a chance to return that public land to its original owners. And it's a huge tract of land. You put that all together, that's about half of California. It's the half that hasn't been settled. It's the half that hasn't been developed economically. It's the authentic indigenous half, but it's so huge that they would end up governing it jointly, just like they briefly did Alcatraz when they claimed it under the same treaty.
Right. Now, Matt, let me ask you this. Have you seen yet the link I sent you that had in it our radio show that we just did the other day, along with the link to Marcus's essay that was very pictorial, and it showed how California would really lose absolutely nothing by giving over these federal lands that are right now federal back to our indigenous peoples?
I don't know that I've seen the link to the last show, but I definitely have to Marcos's latest version of our proposal.
Those two things, I believe both those two things are in my Medium, the link to my Medium blog post. So that's where you should be looking for it. Would you take a quick look and let me know if you see that link to Marcus's essay there too? Because I think that's where I put it.
I don't know that I have. I don't know that I have the Medium app and everything, and quite frankly, that would be a great big space of dead air on this show. But I have seen Marcus' proposal.
Let me see if I can find that. But I also wanted to just throw into the mix that I had an absolutely wonderful time the other day at an Indigenous trade feast. And you know what's so beautiful about that is that out of the goodness of their hearts, after all these treaties that the U.S. has broken, after the horrible treatment that they've had at the hands of the United States, these indigenous peoples that come from just everywhere on the land around us because they were here before we were, they brought to us, sounds and sights of their prayer dancing. They brought jewelry to sell that they had made. They brought their books. They brought their foods, and they shared these things with us. And they've been doing this in the town where I grew up ever since I was very, very little. And there was a board of directors that was inspired to put this into play when I was very young, and they were inspired by some children who said, please, before you let these bulldozers, start tearing up the land right here, can you please allow us to dig through and just find some arrowheads and artifacts and things to save and rescue? And because of those children that were interested in preserving the history of the land right in the spot where that was about to be bulldozed for development, these board members of Novato were inspired to actually stop plans and protect the land for a little while for that purpose. And we learned so much by doing that inspired them further to promote these trade feasts every year that educate children and more people of all ages. And in this way, we are brought together with the indigenous peoples that we displaced and did such horrible things to way back when we invaded from Europe.
Interesting that you should mention that, because I'm getting ready myself to go to a couple such events right here, being hosted by our local indigenous folks, the people of the Pines. 28th, they're going to have what they call a Native American Day up at one of my alma maters, CSU San Bernardino. And at the same place in October, just before Indigenous Peoples Day, they're going to have a great big, what they call a powwow. It was at the one last year that they flat out rejected California independence as a threat to their treaty rights.
Can you tell people where to find more information on that powwow and also on the other event, Matt?
Sure. Under Facebook events. And just type in San Manuel, and those two events should pop up. Okay. If you giggle it, it would be San Manuel Native American Day and San Manuel Powwow 2018, and it should pop right up. Okay, I'm going to be at those presenting our response to their rejection, okay, to their criticism that Marco and I have been working on. He made the original proposal. I critique it, came up with a counter proposal, and he's been making those beautiful citations in support of my proposal. Okay, but we're both the premise of our proposals, and now the joint proposal that we're developing with other people, is the retrocession, the return of public lands to the indigenous nations. Okay. So yeah, I'm going to present whatever version I can to the latest version as of that date to the U of Utah, the people of the Pines, when they're at Cal.